learning mindfulness techniques. What are all the ways that you are literally taking care of yourself every day? What are the boundaries that you're putting up to protect yourself? And, what are you eating and how's your sleep? And what is in your stress toolkit to deal with things as they come up? And here are some botanical medicines to tone these systems that are underlying it all. And that's where cannabis, is such a unique piece because the cannabinoid compounds in the cannabis plant are, not largely found in other plants.
Cannabis has, for a very long time, been stigmatized, especially over the past 60 or 70 years in our nation. Yet this plant, which grows like a weed, hence the name weed, has so many therapeutic benefits, from fertility through your menopausal years, and a part of deprogramming people to feel that this is a harmful gateway drug to a catastrophic, downward spiral in your life. A part of deprogramming people is bringing people onto the podcast who are truly experts in the endocannabinoid system in the body and how it pertains to, again, everything from fertility to reproduction to just basic management of anxiety and depression, all the way through your menopausal years and really even into the end of life process. Cannabis has a variety of therapeutic benefits. And I wanted to bring my guest on today, Michelle Sexton. She's a naturopathic doctor, and she initially found me through an online program that she produced called the Green Woman's Guide. And we'll put links to all of her resources here in the podcast description, as well as on our YouTube channel. But then she also authored a book that frankly is kind of like a book that if you're practicing any type of women's health, you should probably have this book. It's called Eat, Sleep, Relax, Protect, Forget, an Endocannabinoid Guide to Systems Wholeness for Women, authored by my guest today. And it's just so chock full of really, really important insights into how we can utilize this plant and the herbal tonics that can be derived from this plant as a means to really optimize your overall well-being, from the physical through the mental, emotional, and maybe even spiritual. Cannabis in my life has been a really, really important tool for connecting more intimately with my wife, with my family and friends. And frankly, if I ever developed pain, or if I developed cancer, or if I developed anxiety or depression, I would probably be using cannabis first. Because the downsides of using cannabis, even in small doses, you can get these huge benefits, but the downsides are so much fewer and less dangerous, less harmful over the long term than a variety of pharmaceuticals and even surgeries that are offered to women to manage a variety of their health issues, including, of course, depression and anxiety, but also endometriosis, also a variety of different pain disorders. And frankly, it also has implications in the fertility and sort of the overall womb health that you experience throughout your life. When you reach the menopausal years, a lot of the perimenopausal symptoms that have become so frustrating for so many women can be very, very well managed during those years through even low doses of different cannabis products. So what we talk about here is how to use cannabis, how to get started with it, how to start to talk to your friends and family maybe about this, because it is so stigmatized in the United States, just our society in general, I suppose. So you're going to love hearing from Michelle. I like to bring like the real experts in on these topics. And I don't consider myself an expert in cannabis apart from what I've seen it do for myself, my wife, other family members, and so many of my clients. So you're going to love hearing from Michelle. In order to keep the lights on, we of course have a couple sponsors. The first is Immune Intel AHCC. I love this product because frankly, it it really fills in a gap for so many women with persistent HPV. They've got this signal that something's gone awry, but what can be done while you're waiting for the repeat PAP or the repeat HPV screen? Maybe you've got a colposcopy with biopsy scheduled. What can you be doing while you're awaiting that in order to ensure that your immune system is able to do its job of clearing precancerous cells? Well, Mimi Lindquist, the founder of this product, she had done an incredible amount of research on Immune Intel, which, the active hexose correlated compound part is not proprietary, but the way that it's blended in by Mimi and her team at Immune Intel provides you with a very, very directed way of supplementing your already healthy lifestyle in order to ensure that you're going to have a negative PAP, negative HPV screen. You're not going to even have to go through the painful biopsies. You're never going to even get to that leap or the excisional procedure stage. This is a mainstay of an otherwise very, very healthy lifestyle, all of which is completely encompassed in a course that Mimi and I produced called Clear and Free, Your Holistic Solution to Persistent HPV. You can find out more information about the program at clearhpv.com. Clearhpv.com. It's a mouthful. But if you want to try this product, I can't recommend it enough. I take it every 3 to 4 months, a bottle of it, 2 capsules twice a day, in order to get my immune system working optimally again. It raises your T cells, your NK cells. Those are the cells that are going around scavenging precancerous cells. This is an important part of our health. And it's not a replacement for healthy lifestyle any more than a prenatal is a replacement for healthy lifestyle. But it is certainly helpful in that acute phase where you've been told you're going to die of something terrible. Start taking this supplement. Come and join us at Clear and Free. Again, the website is clearhpv.com. But if you want to just buy a bottle of this product, you can go to themedicine.com. That's THEMEDICIN.com. Use code beloved10. You'll save yourself 10%. We have one other sponsor for this episode, which is WeNatal. There's a lot of prenatal vitamins out there, tons. Most of them are mass produced. They have inadequate amounts of all of those nourishing ingredients, the micronutrients, the macronutrients, the stuff that you actually really, really need in order to support your body and a growing baby when you're pregnant. There are very, very few brands that do it right, and WeNatal is one of them. If you go to wenatal.com and use code BELOVED, you're also going to get a bottle of their Omega DHA Plus, which is loaded with omega-3 fatty acids, which are also so extremely important. And again, it's not a replacement for eating fatty fish, but it certainly is helpful. You want to aim for about 1,000 milligrams at least of EPA daily whenever you're growing a baby. And I really do that. I recommend that really even if you're not growing a baby. So this is good for men and women. But their prenatal products are hands down some of the best I've ever come across. And they're also very, very conscious about eco-conscious around packaging. So when you go and subscribe, you'll get glass bottles that send you little sleeves of capsules to refill those bottles over time. And again, like I said, you can also score a free bottle of their Omega DHA Plus if you go to wenatal.com and use code BELOVED. I love them. I've interviewed them on the show. Please go and listen into that episode if you want more information. But really, as a prenatal care provider, I have to have a favorite. And right now, WeNatal is leading the pack. Just how they show up, they're very conscious around what they've put into these various supplements. And what's really, really nice about them versus a lot of other companies is they're not trying to do every supplement. They're trying to do one really, really well. And that is prenatal nutrition. So as soon as you get the glimmer in your eye, I recommend taking a very high quality prenatal, both for you and your male partner. Get your sperm, get your eggs, get your entire inner workings as nourished as possible, because growing a baby is very hard. And you don't want something that has a bunch of synthetic fillers. You don't want something that has folic acid. You want the best. WeNatal.com is where you can find that. Use code BELOVED. You'll get that free bottle of fish oil as well. Guys, if anything in any of these episodes captures your imagination, right? If you find it valuable, please share with your friends and family. Getting these conversations out to people in a world that is rife with just kind of overly promotional, kind of like, dare I say, just boring and ineffective podcasts. If there's something here that's important to you, please share it. We want to rise in the rankings. We want to get these conversations out to as many people as possible. And of course, another way to support the program is not only just supporting the sponsors, Immune Intel and WeNatal, but also leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you're listening to this. And if you haven't found us on YouTube, the Holistic OBGYN podcast is there. You can actually see these, keep them on in the background while you're at work or at the gym or you're driving. Just listen in. And if you want to see people live, of course, you're not going to be watching while you're driving. But just consider this. Go and subscribe on YouTube. You'll get a far more comprehensive look at some of these topics when you can see us interacting live. Um, all right. My guest today is Michelle Sexton. She's an expert in the endocannabinoid system. She's an expert in how to utilize cannabis in a conscious, intentional way in order to improve your health, improve your intimacy, improve your overall well-being, improve your lifespan, your health span, everything in between. You're going to love this one. My name is Nathan Riley. I am the Holistic OBGYN. I'm a board-certified OBGYN and hospice and palliative care physician. You can find my work at belovedholistics.com. I also have a program called the Born Free Method, bornfreemethod.com, where companies like WeNatal and Immune Intel AHCC are featured because I only want the best for my clients and for my community. And if you want to be part of the most comprehensive pregnancy and postpartum support and educational program, Born Free Method is for you. I can also be found on Instagram at Nathan Riley OBGYN. You're going to love this conversation with Michelle. Let's dive right in. Dr. Sexton, welcome to my podcast. I'm so happy to have somebody else who has medical credentials, who is also an advocate for cannabis use. And so I want to start this one off with a flurry. Are you convinced that there are some benefits to using cannabis in pregnancy?
Well, I think convinced is maybe a little too strong of a word. I'm very curious about it and um, thinking a lot about, the risk benefit ratio and the use of cannabis when there are sometimes not other alternatives. And
Sure.
as a botanical medicine with a history of safety,
Yeah.
it's worth thinking about, right?
Right. A lot of the people who come my way, and in fact, even my co-creator on the Born Free Method, Sarah Rosser, she really found her midwifery legs on the farm in Tennessee. And most people probably know by now that they had a pretty robust cannabis farm on that property, which of course got them in a lot of trouble because of the 60s and 70s and what we were all going through, even into the 80s, which is continued today, this war on drugs. But frankly, a lot of those midwives, the midwives at the farm, including Ina May and Sarah, cannabis was kind of a part of the deal there. And they didn't see a lot of bad things happening, which is a little bit confronting, I think, for people because there isn't a robust body of literature looking at this through the lens of a placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trial and whatnot. But I'm curious, even preconception, maybe you can talk a little bit about why you think perhaps talking about the endocannabinoid system might be helpful for some people that are experiencing suboptimal fertility. Let's start there.
Well, I wanted to just start by talking about survival on the
Mm.
planet. And and this is important when we talk about the endocannabinoid system, because of this experiment that was done by Esther Fried, and this was published back in, I think, 2008. And it was in animals, where we have the ability to go in and, subtract things out of our biochemistry. And so when they blocked what we call the CB1 receptor, which is the most important in the central nervous system, that these animals lost their ability to suck and that
Mm.
therefore died. So that endocannabinoid connection to the suckling reflex, is sort of a starting place for our survival on the planet. But if you go, backwards even into the womb, the endocannabinoid system is very intimately involved in the development of the brain, the migration of neurons out, making their pathways. And so, thinking about this system in pregnancy and even, you know, fertility and reproduction in general is very relevant.
Yeah, maybe we can kind of start this off and then, with an overview of like when you say endocannabinoids, right? Like cannab, I immediately think of this plant that grows like a weed almost everywhere at least on our continent. I'm sure it grows pretty much everywhere in the world, but this cannabis plant has been so stigmatized, and yet we have receptors for some of these substances found in this herbal remedy, this herbal therapy. Maybe you can describe a little bit, give us a little overview of the endocannabinoid system in the human body, and
Okay.
at least what we can glean from a lot of the other animal studies.
Yeah, so it's considered to be a complete system because our body synthesizes these compounds called endocannabinoids. We have specific receptors where they bind and have action. We have enzymes that break them down and recycle them. And it's a homeostatic system. It's in every tissue in the body. And its sole purpose or its main purpose is to keep things at homeostasis. So this was first described, where neurons meet and send signals to each other as the negative feedback loop of basically to say, got the message. And so this
Mm,
is occurring not only, with neurotransmission, but I think another very important place that it's occurring is our what we call the HPA axis or our
yeah,
adrenal activity, getting um, activated by stress. It's part of that negative feedback loop telling the adrenals, I got the message, you can quit pumping out cortisol. It's part of the feedback in the brain to the ovaries, when it comes to estrogen and progesterone and modulating that luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone and all of that. So, this is why we know it's important in reproduction because those receptors are found on the ovaries, in all of the uterine tissue, placental development, the immune system, as the immune system adapting, to receive pregnancy or not to reject this foreign
right. That's
material.
tricky, isn't it? It's a tricky thing. This pregnancy thing. There's this foreign body developing inside of you that's not entirely your own. How does the
Mhm.
immune system differentiate these things? The endocannabinoid system definitely plays a part.
Yeah, it's because this cannabinoid 2 receptor is on all the immune tissues. And, our body has to say, okay, this is foreign, but I'm not going to kick it out, right?
Right, right, right,
And
right.
the endocannabinoid system is adjusting and adapting in that scenario to make sure that we're not rejecting the fertilized ovum.
So these endocannabinoids, the endo part of that, I presume means that's something that's endogenous. It's something produced within our bodies. Is this a these endocannabinoids, are they neurotransmitters or are they hormones or are they both?
I would say they're both because they can act locally, at the cell right next to them, but we also measure them in circulation. And so we know that they're circulating around. They're probably um, dialed in individually in each tissue space, depending on what's going on with that tissue. Like if we talk about the uterus preparing for implantation, it's a very specialized situation. And so just in the uterus, that's going to be modulated, but it's not necessarily going to affect neurotransmission. So we
Interesting.
call they're not the same as neurotransmitters because neurotransmitters are stored and released, whereas endocannabinoids are made on demand. So they've been
Mm.
called lipid transmitters because they're made from the fats that are in the cell membrane.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they're more
So,
released on demand, not stored and then released.
and I suspect, I mean, I'd have to go back and look, but there's a variety of different endocannabinoid receptors, right? You mentioned number two or number one, but there's probably a whole variety of them. And is it mostly type one and type two, or like maybe you can explain that? And what do you find in the brain versus what you're finding in the reproductive system?
Well, the type of receptor that they are, um, the CB1 receptor is the most highly expressed of that entire receptor subtype in the brain. So there's more CB1 receptor in the brain than like dopamine receptor or serotonin
Oh,
or
wow.
GABA. And it's everywhere in the brain. It's in every part of the brain, some areas more dense than others. Um, so CB1 was the prototypical one that helped us to understand how THC is being psychoactive, basically. Uh,
Gotcha. Gotcha. And that was obviously what most people love smoking pot because it gets you high. Like, let's just be clear. People that use pot probably like that they get a little buzz or it gives them a little suppression of their nervous system, helps them go to sleep. That's all CB1 that we're talking about, right? For the most part.
yes, yeah, because the CB2 receptor um, is really only expressed on immune cells and immune tissues. So you could have CB2 receptor in the brain, but that's usually going to be when there's some form of neuroinflammation going on and those immune cells are getting into the brain
Oh.
or it's getting upregulated on the resident immune cells of the brain. And so this is relevant for especially postpartum when that rapid immune shift, has to occur. And again, getting that homeostasis of the endocannabinoid system back is probably involved in postpartum depression because it's likely affiliated with, brain inflammation from this rapid.
Mm. So, in your Green Woman's Guide, it's been a while since I took your program. For those of you who aren't familiar with our YouTube channel, if you go there, we'll have all of these. You'll get to see Michelle in person here, but also a lot of the links that we're going to be talking about, like her Green Women's Guide. We will have links to everything, not only in the podcast description, but in the YouTube channel right up on the screen. I remember, going through this and thinking about such a variety of applications for this information. But given that we produce cannabinoids sort of within our own brains, our bodies, and a lot of our tissues, if there's fat, you've got cannabinoids, right? So we've got fat everywhere, including the lining of every one of our neurons. And if a person hasn't used exogenous cannabinoids, we're talking smoking or eating or digesting in some way a cannabis or hemp product, um, what is their CB1 and CB2, like these different receptors, how is it going to be reflected for somebody who's not using cannabis products exogenously versus they're just going on their own magic?
Well, the scenario is going to be different for everyone, of course. One thing that we know, there can be genetic differences like in the receptor or in these enzymes that I talked about that can affect how the whole system's functioning. And then another important scenario that I think is really relevant for women in general, but for everyone, is the impacts of stress on the endocannabinoid system. It's been demonstrated that people diagnosed with PTSD have a decreased level of the cannabinoid 1 receptor. And this is really going hand in
Oh, that's
hand with
interesting.
reduction in cortisol that occurs over time. And
Yeah.
so, if you're a really healthy person and all of that hasn't been affected, by some serious adverse childhood experiences, traumatic events, PTSD, you're probably making enough and getting along just fine. But for many people in today's world, that's just not the situation. And
Right.
so when we
Right.
think about well, what do we do about that? The options for people are often anti-anxiety drugs, which we know are not optimal, or SSRIs or antidepressant drugs, which are also described for anxiety, but it doesn't really treat the root cause, right?
Mm.
So yeah, the whole endocannabinoid system can be sort of down-regulated in those scenarios, and
Mm.
that's when we want to tone it, bring it back up to the healthy level where it should be.
So what is the like evolutionarily speaking, why did we even develop this system?
Oh, I love that you asked that question because it's fascinating because you can trace the endocannabinoid system all the way back to archaebacteria, which is millions of years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
So, if you can imagine our planet at some point in time was not an oxygen rich environment. It was nitrogen rich. And when that, the atmosphere started changing and there was more oxygen, these organisms that were on the planet had to adapt. And so our mitochondria, which actually evolved from these ancient bacteria, is where the CB1 receptor was expressed. And so at the level of the mitochondria, which is a tiny inclusion in our cell that's all about energy production, the CB1 receptor was acting and still does in our body act as sort of an oxygen sensor. And specifically for what we call reactive oxygen species. So these bacteria, evolved this to actually adapt to the oxygen rich environment of the earth.
Wow.
So that's how far back it goes.
So what role, I mean, let's say you had a magic pill that can knock out your endocannabinoid receptors. You no longer have them. Like some sort of genetic mutation happens. You get blasted with a microwave or something. You no longer have functioning these cannabinoid receptors in the body. What are the health consequences of not having that?
Well, I think we discussed at the beginning, you may not survive because the sucking reflex is going to be lost.
Well,
Beyond
like I'm
that,
an adult. I'm an adult. So like I'm perfectly fine one day. I wake up the next day, I've got no endocannabinoid system. What sort of life am I going to live?
well, I think all systems would just go haywire because it's so involved in bringing everything back to homeostasis. So anytime a system has to respond to something, and we think about our adrenals a lot because that's what we have to respond to stress, people lose their stress resilience, and so that's kind of at a basic practical level, just the ability to cope, with everyday things that are flying at us. That could kill us. Stress alone, that leads to inflammation over time is going to affect all of our organ systems. We know that that leads to cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, cancer,
Sure,
you
sure.
know all kinds of things.
So we've got the classic person who's in some state of what used to be called adrenal fatigue. Now we're seeing it's more of a global hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction. And naturally, you would expect that they have a lower, I don't know, proportion of CB receptors to other receptors on various cells. It reflects that they're heading towards a state of, some degree of dysfunction as a consequence of not having resilience to stress. And stress is everywhere. So, gosh, most people who come to me with fertility challenges, they are struggling to produce enough sex hormones. Their menstrual cycles maybe are off, if not stopped altogether. Maybe they're skipping cycles. They don't feel like they've got the mood or the motivation. They kind of feel depressed. They just don't feel like they're fully embodied anymore. How does how do you work with them as a naturopathic doctor? I mean, granted, you're going to have to customize this and you're going to be looking at functional labs and everything else, but how does maybe you can just talk about adrenal fatigue, as we used to call it, and what role or how do you implement cannabinoids? I'm guessing exogenous cannabinoids. Maybe that's what people listening are interested in as well. How does
Right.
that actually work? Like, maybe you can talk about like like so what I'm hearing is you have a lower amount of cannabinoid receptors in periods of chronic stress, PTSD, these super anxious periods. How is adding the key to that lock in large amounts, how is that going to fix anything any more than anti-anxiety meds or SSRIs?
Well, so naturopathic medicine is really based on whole person care. So we're never just going in trying to treat one system.
Of
We're trying to
course.
see,
Yeah.
how are all the systems talking? So I actually had a patient yesterday. She was returning after seeing me initially for, a high stress situation and, trying to adapt and working a new job and doing a school program and just being like, oh, many women that are just like hyper functioning, we have to do it all, right? We have to get everything perfect. We have to fix everything for everybody, so that the scenario over time and adrenal burnout. So we did her serial cortisol testing and she's just sort of a flat line.
Flat. Yeah.
not having that morning cortisol boost,
I've
and then
seen
it's even
that.
low at the end of the day. And she actually leads a wellness program. So, like, she even has more pressure on herself that, well, she should be well, and she should be able to be well without any help, right?
Of course,
Uh,
yeah. The broken healer.
yeah, yeah. So she is, struggling with, well, what do I do? And very scared about using cannabis or trying cannabis. So when I talk to patients about it, I basically describe it as, so there's kind of three ways that cannabis can hit us, or specifically THC impacting our endocannabinoid system. So at really low dose, I call it toning, because at low dose, like you would find in hemp, the presence of these chemicals in plants, our relationship is actually to tone systems. It tones enzyme systems, it tones our inflammation, it tones specific receptors. So if you have a really suppressed endocannabinoid system, you want to upregulate it. So you really want low dose.
Mm,
Go to the next level. If somebody, you're probably aware that, if somebody's really struggling and are debilitated by anxiety, you really have to treat that anxiety to get to anything else. And
yeah,
so that's when
right.
I talk about cannabis as a hack. So, you can go to a little bit higher dose and really just bring somebody down,
Mm,
bring them down off of that anxiety high to a
yeah,
different
yeah,
high, right? And then
right.
if you go to a really high dose, like many people, and I find even young women are using these vape pens that are sometimes 80 to 90% THC content, you're actually then suppressing the endocannabinoid system. And so,
Sort of like insulin resistance. Like, you just
yeah,
throw so much insulin at it, and the cells are like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 take those receptors back. There's way too much of
well,
that key in the
it's
system."
actually even worse. It's even worse because uh, so cannabinoid receptors, say, like at excitatory neuroterminals. So, for listeners, the excitatory neurochemicals are like glutamate and dopamine. And then we have the inhibitory, which is GABA, our GABA neurotransmitter. So you have cannabinoid receptors that are at each of these types of synapses. Well, these cannabinoid receptors apparently have different affinities to THC. So, like at the glutamate receptors, THC binds really easily and there's a higher affinity. But if you go over here to GABA, it takes a higher dose to bind the GABA. So, as you go up in dose and you bind the GABA at the GABA terminals, you're actually inhibiting inhibition or creating more excitation. And so, this is why people get
Oh,
paranoia and anxiety from too high of a dose of THC from the cannabis. So for a lot
I
of
see.
people, it's more they find it more acceptable to maybe use these really low toning doses rather than thinking they have to get high to treat themselves. So
Yeah.
especially you don't want to exacerbate by going to that suppression dose.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think it would be, if anybody out there who has been to a dispensary, by the way, Michelle, are you in California? I
Yeah.
suspect you might be. Okay, so California, you go to, like, I don't know, I don't even know the names of them anymore. I did all my training out there, but you'd go in and it's like an Apple store of options, right? And you go to the bud tender. I remember they used to call themselves. I mean, now the reason I don't know this is my friends grow and people send me their strains, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. I won't even mention names, but like some really, really cool, well-known celebrity type people have sent me stuff they've grown. And I'm like, shit, you don't need to go to the dispenser anymore. Like, now that people are just loving on these plants, they can grow all kinds of interesting strains. Um, but frankly, I'll sometimes find that certain strains, especially the indica dominant strains, my wife and I usually use indica dominant hybrids, but if it's a purely indica, I am like out cold. I don't have a high tolerance for virtually any drug. I mean, I've done a lot of different things. I'll just leave it at that. But when I'm on like like weed is not something I can just use all day long and get by. I know people oftentimes are doing that now, but if I take like a strong puff of a joint that's a indica, like a strictly pure indica strain, I'm guessing from what you're saying that we're getting a there that for whatever reason there's an affinity for the THC or the chemicals, the cannabinoids in that joint from that plant for the more suppressive channels in my brain and whatnot, right? Versus the excitation and the creativity that comes from sativa. Do I have that right? Is there a further affinity? Kind of, you can break that down even further based on the
Well,
strain?
this whole sativa indica nomenclature or naming has kind of been debunked, honestly.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and this is because, when the plant was, being discovered out in the wild, it was very clear that there were distinct uh, phenotypes that, by looking at them,
Thin
one
leaves
is
versus wide
very
leaves.
tall, yeah, kind of like a Christmas tree, thin leaves, the branches are far apart. I saw it growing up in the mountains of Nepal that way. And then you go into other areas of the planet, and it's a more short, very bushy, fat-leafed plant. And this is where, the original botanists described visually what they looked like. We knew nothing about how did the chemical content compare at
Oh.
that time. But and then, the whole thing just blew open and people started bringing in all these land races and hybridizing and just mixing them together. And a lot of what we have now are all hybrids.
Oh, interesting.
So
Okay.
there have been large data sets, 2 different times here in California, of like 1,000 plants, and they do something called principal component analysis, to see how different are they, and basically found they're just all clustering. So they're clustered together because they've all been bred for high THC content. And in the process, we lost the biodiversity of these essential oil components that will really vary based on the environment. And with
Oh,
everything being grown indoors, not even, experiencing the environment, that kind of even narrows even more what the plant's going to make.
oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, the nomenclature anymore is highly questionable.
Sure,
But
sure.
but we do know, we can use certain ones and we notice, "Oh, yeah, this is a very heavy body feeling," or another one that's very stimulating and, energetic. We just haven't teased out all of the different chemical components that, are kind of modulating the THC effect.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I could ask you a billion. Like my biochemistry mind is now turning, and I don't even know if I have the language to ask some things that I want to ask, but um I do. Well, let me start with this because I know that this is going to unlock some interesting conversation. In your practice, what are three of the most important applications that you have found for various THC containing products? Well, let's start there. For women, or for men, I guess.
Sleep, pain, anxiety.
Sleep,
It's pretty
pain, anxiety. Yeah, yeah.
pretty Yeah,
Pretty
because
cliche.
women have a lot more health problems than men. We're so complex with this monthly hormonal fluctuation that sometimes just knocks us flat and can really
Sure.
affect our quality of life, whether it's menstrual pain, endometrial pain, pelvic pain, all kinds of pain we have that men don't typically have. And then these fluctuating hormones affecting our moods, and a lot of women having a lot of anxiety. You add the stress of the daily world, onto these hormonal changes. And then women have a lot more sleep problems than men.
Yeah,
We know, especially as
yeah.
women start entering that perimenopause, which can start for some
So
women in their 30s, right? That the first change is changes in sleep and changes in the brain. So women need a lot of help, and we don't always
mm,
have a lot of answers from the pharmaceutical world, for
sure.
these things we experience.
Well, playing devil's advocate a little bit, a lot of people out there, they say, down with the pharma and this and that. But instead of prescribing, practitioners are even guilty of this. Instead of prescribing pills, now we're prescribing herbal remedies or natural remedies. I get 10 questions a day on Instagram that's like, what's a natural remedy for this? And I'm like, there is no natural or pharmaceutical remedy for anything. What is going on upstream that is causing this issue? So, as a devil's advocate, what problem are we actually solving by giving people cannabis products if we're not like doing the rest of the work? Or maybe you can kind of walk through how you've worked with a client there where we're not just replacing your SSRI with cannabis. Like what else is happening there if a person is suffering from some maybe debilitating anxiety? Like what is the process there? And is this cannabis a bridge, or is this now becoming a mainstay of their sort of supplementing?
That's such a great point because, as I was saying, treating the whole person takes time, and it, takes time of listening to the patient. And then it takes time and it takes overtime, to address all of these underlying areas. So I think it takes a lot of self awareness on the part of the patient, and it takes a lot of commitment, maybe to making lifestyle changes, sometimes changing jobs, sometimes changing partners. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot that can play into it for women. And so getting in tune with, yeah, what is underneath all this? And so that's why I'm often going all the way back to the adverse childhood experiences scoring, to say, where did all this start? And even, beyond that, what happened to their mother and their grandmother?
Mm,
Because this all gets passed down in the womb. So, if their mother was in a bad situation when they were in the womb, not only do they inherit sort of what's going on hormonally and chemically, but it actually pre-wires the developing brain to be hypervigilant.
yeah.
So, it's not a simple fix. It's learning about your past, becoming aware of ancestral and generational trauma. What was it like for your mother? What did she pass on to you? These are all things that we're dealing with. So, yeah, it's not just take this one compound and
Sure,
fix.
sure.
It's like doing the psychological work and ritual work, and um,
Mm,
in addition to, I think the two pieces are so important of treating the bio and neurochemistry and making adaptations to how we're living that may contribute to things ongoing.
yeah, yeah,
So, learning mindfulness techniques. What are all the ways that you are literally taking care of yourself every day? What are the boundaries that you're putting up to protect yourself? And,
yeah,
what are you eating and how's your sleep? And what is in your stress toolkit to deal with things as they come up? And here are some botanical medicines to tone these systems that are underlying it all. And that's
yeah.
where cannabis, is such a unique piece because the cannabinoid compounds in the cannabis plant are, not largely found in other plants.
Yeah, pretty unique. It's the cannabis plant in general is such an awesome well, provides a great opportunity to really connect back with nature as well. Because frankly, in most parts of North America, if you go out into the woods, you're probably going to find a cannabis plant and just didn't even realize that's what it was. I mean, it grows like a weed. That's why we call it weed.
Yeah, it's a
And
weed.
I invite people who are listening, to really, consider that, even through the lens of other plant medicines, that there's an opportunity here to connect deeply with this plant and have reverence for the healing properties of plants, not because they can do it for you, but they can do it with you. Like they want you to feel better. There are these certain botanicals out there that can make you feel so much better. And something I'm learning, I'm studying plant medicine now through Mexican sort of herbal medicine lens. And um, a big mainstay of it is that the plant needs to feel safe with you in order to bring its healing powers to you. So, if you're taking this as a pharmaceutical, you're probably missing the mark. Use this in reverence, set some intention, and really like honor the plant. Like be thankful that you have this medicine as opposed to thanking Pfizer for their newest, latest, and greatest antidepressant, which is hard to do because it's so synthesized. You could have this little plant and it can be providing you medicine year round with the right love and care. And I feel like that in and of itself is actually a part of the healing protocol for people who bring trauma into their depression and anxiety stories and their pain stories. So, having said that, I think a lot of people still are very stigmatized around the use of certain substances. Cannabis is certainly no exception. So, for people out there who maybe have, well, let's use menopause for example. Like my mother is 70 now, and she has smoked pot as long as I've been alive. Um, but before she started using cannabis, and my dad had introduced her to that as well as LSD and going to see Jimmy Page, laser beam shooting out of his guitar during concerts and whatnot. Cannabis was like she had this kind of barrier to entry there. So, for people out there, like maybe somebody of my mom's age who's going through some, my mom's well past menopause, but let's say that somebody's starting to feel like, oh, I wish there was a better alternative, but they still have this kind of psychological apprehension around what these substances can do. How do you suggest somebody start this? They are completely green to being green, so to speak. How do you suggest somebody start using this medicine?
Well, you're describing the vast majority of the patients that I see in the UCSD system where I work, where often their pain doctor or their primary care doctor or their oncologist may have said, I think cannabis can help you. And so we're going to send you over for a consultation on that. And so these are not people that are just going to walk in a dispensary. They're often highly skeptical about it, likely afraid of it. Many are older people. So this is a common scenario. So I'm constantly having to talk people down about it. So one thing is just, talking about what are their other alternatives. Sometimes there are no other alternatives,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
We're at the end of the line with pharmaceuticals or other treatments. And so the way that I usually present it is they don't necessarily have to be high to have some benefit from the plant. And so that shocks people. And helping them to understand that dose matters. So we know that THC and almost really a lot of compounds, not just cannabinoids, but other drugs even have what we call biphasic effects.
Yeah.
So we know that at very low dose, THC can really calm anxiety, for instance. And then, like we said, as you go up in dose, you can actually create anxiety.
Mm.
So the same is true for pain. At very low dose, we know that THC can be very effective for pain. At higher dose, it kind of loses that effectiveness and may actually exacerbate pain. Same goes for sleep. At pretty low doses, it can really facilitate sleep. At high dose, it interferes with REM sleep. So just letting people know that it doesn't have to be a high dose. I say, we're talking about therapeutic dosing, not recreational dosing. So just kind
Yeah.
of finding that these are two different things. And then often starting people out on a hemp based product that's a full spectrum. So there's THC in it. I found that a lot of people never even feel the effects of THC when they use it in that combination. For
Mm.
people that, are maybe more experienced with cannabis or had a good experience with it in the past and are welcoming it back into their life. I typically go with maybe a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD. That seems to work really well. And then for people that need very fast effects, actually having them inhale cannabis. So people with acute pain, acute anxiety, waking in the middle of the night where it needs to be more, immediate. This is a vaporizer tool. So this is called dry vaping. So
Oh, tell me about that.
yeah, you need to try this because the actual ground flower goes into this heating chamber. And this really allows for the whole experience of the terpene or the essential oil component. Because when you burn it like in a joint, sometimes some of those essential oil components get combusted and you're kind of missing out on them. But when you inhale them using this, you actually taste them, you get the flavor and the smell of them. And then some of the components like linalool that's also in lavender binds the GABA receptor. So this is part of that modulating effect of THC.
Ah.
So you really want those terpenes. And in California, and we can get low potency cannabis. So THC content, say 5 to 10%. And in many places, I just got back from a book tour in Texas. You can go buy hemp flower almost anywhere. And
You get the benefits of the CBD. Yeah.
the CBD, a little bit of THC,
Tiny bit. Yeah.
and those terpenes. And sometimes that tiny bit, especially for older people, because like everything else, our endocannabinoid system is getting downregulated with age. So as we
Mm.
get older, we don't even really need very much THC. It just a little bit does the job really well. So this kind of alleviates people's fears around being, altered or high or dysfunctional, and kind of gives them a pathway, to start using. And if they start with a very, very low dose, I mean, literally, sometimes I start people on a half of a milligram of THC. 3 days later, they bump it up to 1 milligram. 3 days later, 1.5 milligrams, 2 milligrams. They can develop tolerance to side effects as they titrate up in dose. And by the time they get up to this effective dose for their pain or whatever, they're not feeling any side effects. So it's quite remarkable, really.
That's
And
really that's very interesting. So you probably saw me using this bag, and we're gonna take a very brief break because I'm gonna go and blow another one of these. But um, the dry vaping is for me. People are like smoking's bad, but like hold on a second. We have a whole variety of different ways to get some of these substances. And by the way, if you inhale something, it's probably the fastest way to your bloodstream.
Mhm.
Apart from maybe rectal, but I'm not putting anything in my butt anytime soon. So I mean, maybe some Rick Simpson oil in my butt would do me some good. I don't know, but this dry vaping thing, I didn't realize they made little cartridges so small like that. But guys, what we're talking about is that PAX? Is that the PAX device?
Yes. And I don't work for PAX. I'm not promoting it. I just think it's a great device. Are
The
you using
PAX,
the Storz and Bickel Volcano?
a volcano, yeah, old school. You
Well,
got yours there too?
Storz and Bickel also makes.
I saw
Yeah,
that. I didn't realize that it
yeah.
was
So it's the same
that
thing.
small.
You've got a chamber, and you can see the Storz and Bickel has these holes in the bottom, so it heats the plant material very evenly. It can be reheated, so it's not like burning it up and it's all gone. You can heat it, usually
Interesting.
twice. You can adjust the temperature, so a higher temperature is going to be a lot more vapor, you know. And then
Wow.
the top piece has two levels to it, and it's kind of a cooling chamber, so it doesn't really burn your lungs.
Sure, and
And
you're
then
not
you're
getting any particulate matter either.
yeah,
You're
you're
not
not
it's not like
inhaling
smoking.
ash, you're not inhaling that particulate matter, you're not getting those byproducts of combustion that we know are carcinogenic.
Yeah,
You're just
yeah.
inhaling literally the essential oil of the plant.
Guys, there's another doctor here who's saying that this practice of vaporizing is probably okay. And let's also clarify, we're not talking about a highly synthesized cartridge of gunk that's
Mm-mm.
being very, very quickly, I mean, nearly combusted, and then a plume of smoke comes out afterwards. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about dry vaping. I didn't know that was the term for it, but I love that term. And I'm looking at some of these devices here. Michelle, let's take a very, very quick break, just a couple minutes. I'm going to go blow a bag with some herbs and some tobacco, not cannabis, just some other grounding things. And we'll be right back. Is that cool with you?
That's great.
Okay, I'll be right back. Hey guys, it's Nathan. Wanted to interrupt this amazing conversation very briefly to talk to you, specifically if you're a birth worker. This goes for doulas, childbirth educators, midwives of all sorts, whether you're out of hospital or in hospital, and especially the OBGYNs, the family medicine docs, those of you who are attending to births. I want you to ask yourself, if a person rolls into your practice and they're in labor and there's a bud emerging from the vagina, what are you going to do? What I was taught to do was let's rush you to the operating room. Forget about informed consent. We have to do this through the abdomen. We have to do a C-section because the baby is breech. But frankly, I think a lot of women, rightfully so, want to avoid C-section, unnecessarily, of course. And so if you were to just rely on your, let's say your OBGYN residency training, you're not going to have the skills to attend to a breech birth. The good news is most breech babies come out without any intervention at all. But in the rare chance that they have a nuchal arm or a hyperextended neck or whatever, you want to have those skills, and it requires practice on practice on practice to get those skills, which is why I started hosting an annual conference here in Louisville. And in 2024, we're going to be leveling up this entire program. This is the 2024 Born Free Twins Breach Conference, where you're going to be able to get plenty of simulator experience with very, very well-trained educators and instructors. You're going to hear from a variety of midwives and some doctors. This year, we're featuring the Spinning Babies team, Breach Without Borders team. Stu Fishbine's going to be there. Christine Laria is coming with the Breach Without Borders team. She was a recent addition. Caro Gauchi from the Pacific Northwest is coming. We're also bringing 2 keynote speakers, Machilo Motse, who's a newly crowned PhD from South Africa, as well as Doña Angelina Martinez Miranda from Cuernavaca, Mexico, is coming. These are instructors that have quite a bit, a breadth of knowledge and experience in order to help round out your own education. I haven't even mentioned Tracy Vogel, who's an OB anesthesiologist. She's going to be coming in to talk about trauma-informed care. Hermine Hayes-Klein is coming to speak to informed consent. There is so much that we're offering here, and I've only gotten to the didactics part. There's going to be plenty of time to practice on very realistic mannequins. And there are going to be some other activities for you to do some healing and as a means of community building. So we're going to do some trauma release work, a musical odyssey with Rebecca Kelly G. There's going to be some ecstatic dance in the mornings. If you're open to that, it can be very, very releasing, because we've suppressed so much of this stuff throughout our lives that if we can't use our voice and our bodies in an expressive way, it's going to become a second chakra issue. It's going to impact our reproductive organs and our overall health. We're going to be screening Aftershock and having a panel discussion with Shawnee Benton Gibson and Omari Maynard, both of whom were featured in the film because Omari's wife, who is also Shawnee's daughter, she died as the result of what I would call medical negligence due to the color of her skin in the medical system. And that's what Aftershock, the film, is all about. We're going to do a breath workshop with Sarah Tremoli of Effigy Breath. There is just so much healthy food, healthy community, healthy conversation in a very, very safe space. No breakout sessions. You're all going to be in the same room together in a very intimate setting, which I think is very, very important for this work. If you're interested in coming, go to bornfreetwinsbreach.com. Register as early as you can, because the price will gradually increase as we get closer and closer to the event. There are a few opportunities available for work exchange for students or people who are otherwise unable to attend for financial reasons. But everything will be on site at the Omni Hotel in downtown Louisville, a beautiful hotel with some very, very beautiful meals and beautiful spaces that we're all going to be sharing together. I hope to see you in Louisville. The dates are August 8th through the 11th, with an opportunity to do either NRP certification or a simulator intensive workshop with one of our instructors on the 12th, if you want to stick around. And for those who stick around, maybe there'll be some other goodies along the way. bornfreetwinsbreach.com. I hope to see you in Louisville. Michelle, I wanted to ask you, we're talking about a lot of people think about smoking. You and I both have these conversations all the time around different methods. I prefer to have cannabis flower, which I can vaporize myself, or if I do smoke it, it's in like a glass bowl. But there's also a lot of products out there, and in fact, a lot that are even being made without a lot of added sugars and artificial food coloring and whatnot, in the gummy world, and the sodas and the different drinks and cocktail mixes. When people consume this and ingest it, what do you tell them about the difference? And of course, it's going to take at least 30 minutes to start kicking in, sometimes up to maybe 75 minutes to start kicking in. What do you tell people who are still just like, I'm not smoking, doc, you can't get me to use one of those silly things? What do you tell them about the difference in maybe application and experience using edible products?
Well, yeah, a lot of people don't want to inhale. I'm usually just educating them on it. Especially, I work with a lot of patients with, chronic intractable pain, And so I think they're just two different animals to inhale versus, taking it orally that, what we call the pharmacokinetics or the time, like you mentioned, and also what's called the pharmacodynamic,
Dynamic.
how it hits us, what our body does with it, how we feel, what it's doing inside. I think they're really two things, and they are two things because when you inhale, it's going from your lungs directly into your bloodstream. We know that THC spikes really fast, or CBD, and then it falls out of the bloodstream really fast because these are fat loving compounds that are just getting sucked out into the tissues. And our brain is a big fatty tissue, so they like the brain. Um, when you ingest anything, now we've got individual variations on like transit times and how things move through stomach acid. And then you get to the liver where everything goes first. We call this first pass.
Yeah.
And things get metabolized, right? So the cannabinoid compounds get metabolized by the liver. We do this at different rates. We have differences in our enzymes that do this. And so some people can make more or less of a THC metabolite that is actually equally as potent as THC is and tends to hang around in the bloodstream a lot longer because it's been changed a little bit by the liver.
Interesting.
So it's actually more predictable, what's going to happen when you inhale it than ingest. I mean, I literally have people sometimes that it can take several hours before, the cannabinoids reach the
Oh
peak in
yeah.
the bloodstream.
Oh
There's
yeah.
even a pharmaceutical oral mucosa spray called Sativex that has not yet been approved in the United States. And years ago at a cannabinoid conference in Europe, I was talking with researchers, who were using it in research, but they had tried it themselves. And they said it was absolutely ridiculous how long it took for them to feel the effect. So,
Even an oral spray, like mucous
yeah,
membranes.
all I can imagine is that, it's just getting stuck in the buccal fat or something.
That's
Because that's
interesting.
Yeah, so when you put it on topically, you have to consider subcutaneous fat, and that's the first place that cannabinoids are going to home to. So this is why even putting suppositories in vaginally or rectally, they're highly unlikely to achieve a high level in the blood circulation and have psychoactive effects when just it's going to have more local action of
Yeah.
right where it's been placed.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know this, but I did a fellowship at UCSD in hospice and palliative care. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. Oh,
I was
wow.
one of those fellows doing all kinds of weird stuff at UCSD. And
Oh,
frankly, being in San Diego, you have access to probably some of the best, I don't know, the most equipped dispensaries in the world. I mean, Urban
really?
Leaf was my favorite, I remember. And I had people on a routine basis where I was just like, I got cards from some of the dispensaries and I just would pass them out to my patients while rounding in the hospital because,
Mhm.
they're on like 3 or 4 opioids. A lot of them had advanced cancer. I mean, UCSD is one of the referral centers around the world for advanced cancer treatment. And we'd have people with graft versus host disease after a stem cell transplant. I mean, like horrible mucositis and everything. And cannabis almost always played a role in getting them to be like for their life to be just livable, not just like I'm good as a as I good as new now. So I'm curious, for people out there, let's instead of going the cancer route, let's talk about some of the more frequent painful things women go through, namely endometriosis. This I sense has an autoimmune component to it because that's how I've fixed a lot of people, or not
Mhm.
fixed them, but I've helped them again make life livable. But frankly, I haven't found a regimen that works for everybody, which you've already kind of elucidated some of the reasons why that might be. But for a person with endometriosis, let's say that they're open to utilizing some of these things. Is there some like what would your approach to that be? Would it be the same process for everybody? Start low and then slowly up titrate as you needed it, or like what would you recommend people start with? Topical, oral, smokable? What would you say?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the level and the severity of the pain, right? Um, So in addition to the pain, though, I think we also need to think about the immunomodulatory aspects of cannabinoids. So kind of going first back to that CB2 receptor, that we know it's in the fallopian tubes, it's in the endometrial tissue. And if this is a case of endometrial cells migrating out or peritoneal cells transforming one way or another, uh, most likely the cannabinoid receptor is involved. And so then if we think about that, those cells proliferating or, growing once they get out into this environment in the peritoneum and the abdomen, the CB2 receptor, binding that receptor has been shown to modulate immune system function in that it kind of turns down the volume on pro-inflammatory mediators.
Mm, mm.
So importantly, TNF alpha, which is a huge player in the whole,
Very inflammatory cytokine. Yeah, yeah.
in the monocytes and macrophages. We also know CB2 receptor can slow proliferation. This has been shown in breast cancer cells and other types of cells. So if we can use cannabis to slow proliferation of those cells, to turn down the volume on the inflammation and treat the pain, you got kind of a 3-in-1 therapy.
Mm.
So using it inhaled for extreme pain, using it at low dose orally across the month to help control inflammation and pain. And then the other way that I've been having some patients experiment with it is in pelvic PT and actually using it like an internal massage oil to
In the
massage
vagina.
into the vaginal tissue, because then
Oh,
you're a little closer to where these endometrial lesions may be in the
sure,
abdomen.
sure. Your latest book is Eat, Sleep, Relax, Forget, Protect, an endocannabinoid guide to systems wholeness for women. So since we're on the topic of wholeness, I have found that I have some of the best sex of my life using the right strain of cannabis. And when I was under tremendous periods of stress, I would go through periods where it was almost a pre-ejaculatory problem, like when you're a teenager. And I
Hmm.
find that all of that went away when I started consciously using cannabis. What the hell's going on with this in intimacy? Because I feel like there's a lot of applications there for the whole woman to like get her groove back.
Well, I mean, it's been reported that cannabis can help improve sex drive or libido. And this is typically just acutely, you use it, and if it's oral, a few hours later, or if you inhale, it can be more immediate, right? It can decrease pelvic pain for women, so make sex more pleasurable. But, what we know is that they it was a study actually measured that one of our endocannabinoids 2AG gets elevated in orgasm. So, we know the endocannabinoid system is involved there again. So,
Everywhere.
yeah. So you think of it just kind of like supplementing, the woman I was talking about earlier that's the wellness coordinator, that's struggling on her own with adrenal function and poor stress resilience. Of course, she doesn't have any libido. This becomes a problem in relationship. And so she's been hesitant to use cannabis, but now that she's getting a little bit better, but this is not really resolved. She's now open to trying the cannabis, so she's going to try like a little 2.5 milligram of a gummy in the evening and see, if that helps her. I mean,
Hmm.
I honestly think that vaporization might be the better way, just because it's quicker. But I just always have people start with oral, and then that's always kind of a doorway, maybe to get them to the next level of trying the dry vape.
Hmm. Well, since we're on the topic as well, let's go back to some of the reproductive sort of realities. You're seeing this as beneficial for women with, I'm not going to say it's a women's issue, this fertility issue, but, I think men obviously were the other part of this conversation, but I actually think men are more responsible, so to speak, for these declining fertility rates than the research has been willing to admit, right? Men oftentimes don't want to hold the burden. We put it on women to not only have babies, but also carry the burden of getting pregnant and carrying to term. But I'm finding that a lot of my guys who come to me are overutilizing cannabis and it's actually suppressing spermatogenesis. Can you talk a little bit about how this can become fraught with issues when you're overly using it for a long period of time?
Well, the reason that it affects male reproduction in that way is that THC inhibits luteinizing hormone. And so, this is going to affect men and women. So, especially if they're heavy users, smoking all day, or hitting that vape pen that's 80% THC, you can
Yeah.
almost guarantee that hormonally they're, affecting sperm production. And then the other thing is, as I talked about the brain development in the fetus, then the leading edge of neurons as they are traveling, neurons are traveling out to make connections. The CB1 receptor is at that leading edge. And so you think of the endocannabinoid like calling the neuron out and it's traveling out to the endocannabinoid to make its connection. So apparently the same is true for sperm, that this CB1 receptor is involved in sperm motility. And so again, high dose of THC is going to downregulate the endocannabinoid system and maybe it's, actually affecting the receptor expression on the sperm so that the sperm can't travel. So you've got both, you know, two different ways that it's affecting male fertility.
Right, right. And for those out there listening, the LH, luteinizing hormone, is released from the brain to help tell the testicles or the gonads, I mean, really the ovaries as well, in order to produce, to stimulate the growth and development, let's say, of your gametes, your primary, germ cells. These they're not germ cells. They are germ cells, but they're already sort of halfway there, and your brain tells your testicles or your ovaries, make some more because we have another opportunity here to get pregnant coming. So what you're saying is that we're not getting as strong of a stimulus from the brain to the testicles to produce healthy, robustly swimming sperm. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, and
Well,
heavy use can also affect, erectile function, apparently. The research isn't strong, but if you talk to men who are heavy users, this is a common report.
which
So,
actually makes sense. I mean, it doesn't. I'm not so sure that the libido part. Well, anything in excess is going to cause issues with your
right.
libido, right? It's almost like it's an additional allostatic stressor if you're putting too much of anything into your system and overwhelming it. But the LH thing is also interesting because men who are on testosterone replacement they get hypogonadism where their testicles actually shrink. You're going to see the same thing with common cannabis users. And so it's all kind of the same. The system's just out of balance. So for men out there who are having these libido issues, they want to come off of cannabis. How do you get people? How do you help them come down off of how much they're using and get them back into intentional use?
Well, I mean, I think the best way is just to do a hard stop. And some people are really willing to do that. They once they're educated about what's going on and the impact, it makes it easier for them, I think. And sometimes just cutting back is harder because you're still doing it, and then there's more of a
Right.
temptation. But
Right.
because this system is homeostatic, it bounces back a lot quicker than other systems. So, if we talk about like trying to withdraw from a drug like Xanax and that GABAergic system, that's a hard one. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
opioidergic, and this is why we have withdrawal. Cannabis withdrawal is a real thing. It's just much more mild and tends to not last really long. So that whole system can come back pretty quickly after being suppressed. So, even a week of cutting back can restore tolerance. And then hopefully people can come back to using something that's much lower potency and using it, in a more reasonable, moderate fashion to allow their health to really flourish.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about the LH in women because this is a
Yeah,
really important piece in fertility. So, you know, correct me if I'm wrong because you're the OB-GYN here.
I don't know
But my
shit.
understanding of the LH on the ovary is that it's really responsible for the egg bursting forth, right? The
That's right.
follicle
Yeah,
stimulating hormone is stimulating multiple follicles, of which one's going to finally pop out, and it's the LH that does that, right?
yeah.
So if you're inhibiting LH, it's almost kind of like a situation of polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? You've maybe got follicle stimulation, but they're never popping out. You don't have an egg popping out. Well, when that egg does pop out, if everything's working right, then we've got what the corpus luteum or the yellow body that's producing progesterone. So the egg comes out, it's maybe getting fertilized. That wound from where the egg came is producing progesterone, and that progesterone is playing a role, right, in implantation. And part of how it does this is that it upregulates the enzyme that breaks down anandamide, or one of our primary endocannabinoids. So it provides a situation where anandamide level is really low. And this appears to be part of how the immune system is, allowing the egg in and to implant. Well, if you're using a lot of cannabis, this could really affect this anandamide level. And so, in fact, it's been shown in women undergoing in vitro fertilization that women who had high levels of anandamide are less likely to achieve pregnancy. So, this is just why I'm not saying use cannabis for birth control because that's not the situation at all. It's just that if we have women that are susceptible for whatever reasons that, we don't understand infertility to, having more difficulty conceiving, cannabis might not be a friend in this situation.
Everything, yeah, everything requires a little bit of personalization because really the way that we're talking about cannabis right now doesn't make it seem like a good friend, a companion to the fertility journey. Um, but I do find, going back to what we were saying about stress management and this HPA axis dysfunction, I do find that those people that are just very nerve sensing, through the lens of anthroposophic medicine, they're just like these nervous people. They're always doing something. I'm kind of like this. I mean, I'm definitely like this. They tend to be very thin and lean, and they've got 15 projects at a time. They're doing that. Getting them to just calm down just a little bit allows some time, like a little bit of latency for a lot of those systems to reset. But then if you do too much, then you may actually be suppressing ovulation altogether. So I do, in my opening questionnaires with people, I ask, how much cannabis do you use? It's not if you're using it or not. How much are you using? Because if you know me, you're coming to me, you're probably using it. But if you're using it too much and we're not seeing ovulation like regular cycles, then we have to play with that a little bit. So I guess I'm saying all this just so that people can understand that in the right dose, with the right circumstances, with a trained practitioner like yourself or me, this can be a really, really great boon to your whole health wellness. So I thank you for that. I My last question, Michelle, I know we're running out of time here, is for those women who are approaching this menopausal space, what could a person possibly gain beneficially from the typical scenario of menopause? What do they have to gain, perhaps? I could guess what the answers are, but I'll just throw that to you because I feel like that's probably a lot of women are coming to you for that since you've been doing this for so long. Tell me a little bit about menopause and cannabis use.
Well, I say it's the best time in life for women to use cannabis
Yeah, yeah.
because these, implications, especially on the developing brain during pregnancy, potential roles in fertility, which for most people it's probably not going to be a problem unless it's very heavy use. But once we're past the childbearing years, it's we don't have to think about that anymore.
Yeah.
But we have other things to think about, and what women are coming with are hot flashes. THC has been shown to reduce body temperature. So I've had a lot of women say they really feel just using cannabis has helped reduce the incidence and the severity of their hot flashes. Um, as I mentioned earlier, one of the first changes going into perimenopause is changes in the brain and therefore effects on sleep. And so, who doesn't love sleep? And we're learning so much about how important sleep is and that it's this modifiable risk factor for dementia. And we're getting ready. We are actually in the beginning of, a horrible pandemic of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. The baby boomer population is going to break the healthcare system because we're getting older, we're getting more dementia, and we're requiring long-term care, which is very expensive. So if we can do things now to modify our risk for dementia, age 30 is the time to start thinking about it. But most women don't start thinking about it until menopause, when their estrogen levels drop and they start experiencing these cognitive changes. It's usually kind of transient for most women that, the cognitive change is kind of more severe in the beginning and then it gets a little bit better. And I'm talking about people that are not on hormone replacement therapy, obviously. Um, so, attending to that sleep, making sure that it's good quality of sleep, that means getting into that deep restorative sleep cycle where all of our brain waves are coherent and they're moving along together. And this has been shown to be associated with a pumping action of the cerebrospinal fluid that's cleaning out our brain at night. And, this is part of what contributes to dementia, is this buildup of protein in the brain. So you want to sleep well. So this is where, women have more problems perimenopausally, postmenopausally. So sleep, and then, just enjoyment. Alcohol is a very, very harmful drink. And it's toxic to our brain. When we metabolize it, the first step is aldehyde, and aldehyde basically pickles our brain. And as we get older, the enzyme that changes that aldehyde to acetate gets downregulated. And so we're even more at risk from the harmful toxic effects of alcohol on the brain and other systems than we were when we were younger. So I'm often just encouraging people, just exchange your alcohol for cannabis. Why not? You're not going to feel bad the next day. You're going to sleep better, and you're going to probably be healthier for it all the way around.
A lot of people, when they are, struggling with sleep, they've got the racing mind, they're taking things like Ambien, or they're taking, gosh, heaven forbid, things like Xanax. Like they're going into the pharmacopoeia of pharmaceuticals. Even Benadryl, they have this sedative effect. Quetiapine, it's an antipsychotic. I mean, what on earth are we doing? This is now a sleep aid. One of the big problems with those is that they actually don't get you restful sleep. But the opposite is true for cannabinoids. Is that correct? Like, you actually do still get into a deep REM sleep, or
Well, the problem with cannabis knowledge at that level is that because of the federal Schedule 1 designation, it is not easy as a researcher to study this at all. And, we've had very little access to product. So, what people can access in the real world versus what we can access to study for research, no comparison. And so there's been very little data, and there's a lot of perception out there that cannabis is as bad for sleep as alcohol. And I don't know if this is really true. So let's go to the research just briefly. If you go very early in the days after THC was isolated, and there was some sleep research done around that time, I've looked back at that. The doses were like 25, 50, 120 milligrams of THC, which is it's a huge dose to take
yeah,
orally, you know. Um, then flash forward to more recent time, there are only two studies, and they used the drug version of THC, which is called dronabinol, which is an FDA approved drug. It was approved for weight loss, cachexia, appetite stimulation in HIV, and in chemotherapy induced nausea and vomiting. So it's just an isolate form of THC all by itself. Patients don't tend to like it, but they use this in a study to look at the effects of THC on apnea at night. So they did two studies.
Oh,
They were both small, but interestingly, the doses were 2.5, 5, and 10 milligrams. So now we're talking about, widely different doses of these high doses impaired REM sleep. That's not a good thing.
no.
These low doses, there was a suggestion that it strengthened what we call the ultradian rhythm. So that's our sleep rhythm at night, where you go down into deep sleep, you come back out into REM, and you should have several of these across the night. So that was the suggestion of these lower doses up to 10 milligrams, that it strengthened the ultradian rhythm. So I try to go on the evidence. The evidence is small. And then I have the clinical feedback of, it's really phenomenal what people come back and say about their sleep. They're just
Yeah.
stunned that they're sleeping well, they're feeling more rested. If you sleep well, you have less pain during the day, your brain functions better, on and on and on of the benefits of sleep. So treating sleep is just so foundational for all of health, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I always wonder, a lot of I don't know if this has been, could be easily studied, but I suspect that quite a bit of what's happening with this Alzheimer's trend is actually a consequence of disrupted sleep, which probably leads to some degree of brain inflammation. And you're probably aware that a lot of UFC fighters, football players, and whatnot who are using cannabis frequently actually are finding some protective effect due
Right.
to probably some of the mechanisms you described. And all of that probably comes back to the ability to recover and restore itself back, through homeostasis, back to a state of euflammation or whatever you want to call it, where you have just the right amount of stress without, it becoming problematic and damaging to some of these sensitive tissues.
Right.
So I think in summary, use it wisely, use it in moderation, put some intention here. It can improve your sex life, it can improve your sleep, it can probably improve your overall well-being, but it's not to be used in the way that we use pharmaceuticals. I think it really requires a little bit of nuance, because a little goes a long way and a lot goes too far.
Yeah. I just always say
So
tone, hack, suppress. There's a time to hack. It's always a good time to tone, but watch out for the suppression.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Michelle, it's been a delight. Tell us about your latest book, where people can find it, and anything else you want people to know about working with you.
Well, I really loved writing this book. It's sort of a culmination of my entire career, which we didn't talk about, but I started as a midwife because I read Ina May Gaskin's book back in 1978 and knew that my work on the world was to work with women. So I have loved working with women's health across the lifespan, and then kind of serendipitously got into cannabis research. And so this was really bringing together everything from my life, my botanical medicine, my women's health, midwifery, and cannabis all into one package. And
Yeah.
it might be a little dense for some people. It is kind of biology oriented, but you can skip over parts that get too dense for you and hopefully get to the heart of the message, which is that toning this symptom is going to probably help improve your quality of life and ensure survival on the planet.
Do you have an audiobook version of this yet?
It is going to come out really soon. I told you I have a recording studio in my closet and I'm toward the end of the last chapters. So the audiobook will be available probably within another month. It is on Kindle. It is through on Apple. It's at some local bookstores, and you can also get it on Amazon. And I
Yeah.
would like to invite any reader who reads it to please leave a review on Amazon for me. I'd greatly appreciate that.
I imagine it requires a tremendous amount of cannabis to get through the whole book publishing process. But I'm glad you did, Michelle. I can't wait to get a copy myself. The book is called Eat, Sleep, Relax, Forget, Protect, an Endocannabinoid Guide to Systems Wholeness for Women. I did just find it on Amazon. Guys, it's important to support this type of work, because if Michelle's not doing it, a lot of people aren't ever going to be, privy to some of this stuff. So you guys can also go to find Michelle's online program, Green Women's Guide, at msextonnd, N as in naturopathic, nd.com, or go follow Michelle at dr.michellesexton on Instagram. Michelle, thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Me too.